Dennis Webb pushed his cleaning cart through the empty corridors of Orbital Station Helix 7, humming an old song his mother used to sing. The night shift suited him perfectly. No crowds, no supervisors watching over his shoulder, just him and the endless hallways that needed attention. He had worked here for 3 years now, maintaining the lower decks and forgotten corners that important people never saw. Tonight felt different, though. Dennis had tucked a small paper snowflake into his cart, one he had folded during his lunch break. Christmas was coming, at least by Earth's calendar, and even though station regulations banned cultural displays, he kept the tiny decoration hidden where only he could see it. It reminded him of home, of winters that felt warm despite the cold. His route took him past the diplomatic quarters on level 17. Most janitors avoided this section because the alien dignitaries complained about everything, but Dennis had volunteered for it. The pay was slightly better, and honestly, he liked the quiet up here. These beings were too important to notice a human pushing a mop bucket. As he cleaned the marble-like floors outside the royal suites, Dennis heard something unusual, a sound that resembled crying but not quite. It was more like wind moving through a cave, carrying sadness with it. He stopped and listened carefully. The sound came from behind the reinforced door of Suite 7 Alpha. Dennis knew that room housed Princess Varashil of the Draconis Imperium. He had seen her once during a formal event, a dragon being with scales that shimmered like oil on water and wings that could probably span this entire corridor. She terrified most of the station staff. Dennis hesitated. His job was to clean, not to get involved with alien royalty. But that sound pulled at something inside him. He had heard loneliness before. He knew its voice. He knocked gently on the door. The crying stopped immediately. "Maintenance," Dennis called out, keeping his voice friendly. "Just checking if everything is okay in there." Silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then a voice responded, deep and resonant like a cello. "The cleaning staff does not inquire about my well-being. Leave immediately." But Dennis heard something underneath the command. A tremor, a crack in the royal armor. He made a choice that would probably get him fired. "Look, I know I'm just the janitor," he said, speaking to the door like it was a person. "But that sounded like someone who needed to talk. I've got nowhere else to be for the next hour." Another long silence. Then, surprisingly, the door hissed open. Princess Varashil stood in the center of a room that looked more like a cage than quarters. Yes, the furniture was expensive and the ceiling was high enough for her to spread her wings. But Dennis saw no personal items, no decorations, nothing that suggested anyone actually lived here. It was a beautiful prison. The princess herself looked younger than Dennis had expected. Her scales were deep purple fatting to silver at the edges. Her eyes were golden and currently wet, though no tears fell. Dragons apparently cried differently than humans. "You should not be here," Varashil said, but she did not order him to leave. Dennis shrugged and leaned against his cart. "Probably not, but here I am anyway. I'm Dennis, by the way." "I know what you are," Varashil replied. "A service life form. You maintain the station's cleanliness." "Well, when you put it like that, it sounds pretty boring," Dennis said with a small smile. "But yeah, that's the job. What's yours?" The question seemed to confuse her. "My job." "Everyone's got something they do. What's yours?" Varashil's wings shifted. A gesture Dennis guessed meant discomfort. "I am a diplomatic hostage. My presence here ensures my empire's cooperation with the Galactic Coalition. I have been stationed in this room for 8 of your months. I leave only for official functions where I must stand silently and represent my people's submission." The bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to cut. Dennis felt his heart squeeze with sympathy. "That sounds incredibly lonely," he said simply. Varashil's golden eyes widened. "You pity me, a princess of the Draconis Imperium." "Not pity," Dennis corrected. "I just understand. I work nights because I got tired of feeling invisible during the day, At least in the dark, being alone is normal. Something shifted in Varashel's expression. She moved closer, her movements surprisingly graceful for someone so large. You choose solitude. Sometimes, but there's a difference between choosing to be alone and being forced into it. Dennis noticed she was looking at the paper snowflake on his cart. That's for Christmas. It's a human holiday coming up soon. What is Christmas? Dennis thought about how to explain it. It's complicated, but basically it's a time when humans celebrate hope and family. We give each other gifts, we decorate with lights, we remember that even in the darkest part of winter, there's still warmth if you know where to look. Varashel reached out one clawed hand and gently touched the paper snowflake. My people do not have such celebrations. We honor victories, we commemorate conquests, we demonstrate strength. Sounds exhausting, Dennis said honestly. To his surprise, Varashel made a sound like laughter. It is, very exhausting. They talked for another 20 minutes. Dennis told her about Earth, about snow and hot chocolate and terrible Christmas movies. Varashel told him about her home world, about crystal canyons and thermal vents where her people nested. She spoke about her 6 older siblings and how she was always the smallest, always the one who felt too much. When Dennis finally had to leave to finish his route, he paused at the door. I work this sector every night. If you want company again, I'll be around. Varashel nodded slowly. I would like that, Dennis Webb, but you must be careful. If my handlers discover a human speaking with me outside official protocols, there will be consequences. I'll risk it, Dennis said. Everyone deserves at least one friend. As he pushed his cart down the corridor, Dennis felt something he had not experienced in a long time. Purpose. He had connected with someone who needed connection. It was a small thing, maybe, but small things mattered. Behind him, in Suite 7 Alpha, Princess Varashel held the paper snowflake carefully in her claws and allowed herself something she had not done since arriving at this station. She smiled. 3 weeks passed like water through open fingers. Every night, Dennis stopped by Suite 7 Alpha during his cleaning rounds. Sometimes he stayed for 5 minutes, sometimes for an hour. Nobody seemed to notice or care that the janitor was taking longer than usual on level 17. Varashel changed during those weeks. The first night she had stood stiff and formal, maintaining the royal posture her tutors had drilled into her since hatching. By the second week, she sat on the floor while they talked, wings relaxed, her voice losing its careful control. By the third week, she waited by the door for the sound of his cleaning cart. Dennis brought small gifts, nothing valuable or expensive, just tokens of friendship. A flower from the station's hydroponics bay where vegetables grew under artificial sunlight. An orange from the human sector, which Varashel found fascinating because her world had no citrus fruits. A picture he had drawn of a snowman, which required extensive explanation. In return, Varashel shared pieces of herself that she had never given anyone. She told Dennis about her childhood in the Crystal Spires, where young dragons learned to fly by jumping from terrifying heights. She explained how her species considered emotion a weakness and how she had been punished repeatedly for caring about others. She described the day she showed concern for an injured servant and how her father sent her away for that single moment of compassion. They called it excessive sentiment, Varashel said one night, her voice barely above a whisper. Said I was too soft to ever rule properly, so they sent me here, told me isolation would strengthen me. She looked at Dennis with those golden eyes. But it only made me more alone. Dennis sat on his overturned bucket, which had become his usual seat. Your people have it backwards. Caring about others doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong enough to carry more than just your own weight. Humans think differently than most species, Varashel observed. The other races here see you as strange, too emotional, too quick to form attachments. Maybe, Dennis agreed, but I'd rather be strange and have friends than normal and alone. As December approached, Dennis found himself thinking constantly about Christmas. not the commercial version with expensive gifts and fancy decorations, but the real heart of it. The idea that one night could bring light into darkness, that showing someone they mattered could change everything. Varashil had never received a gift given freely. Everything she owned came with expectations, with political meaning, with strings attached. Dennis decided to change that. He would give her a real Christmas, even if it meant breaking every rule in the station handbook. He started planning in secret, using his 3 years of knowledge about Helix 7's blind spots. There was an old observation deck in Section 12 that nobody used anymore. The meteor shields had been upgraded, making the older deck redundant. It was still functional, still had power and oxygen, but it existed in that forgotten space between official and abandoned. Dennis recruited the only person he trusted completely. Betty Ochoa worked maintenance engineering on the same night shift. She had kind eyes and steady hands, and never asked questions when Dennis traded his dessert rations for her spare electronic components. "You're planning something stupid," Betty said when Dennis finally explained. They sat in the empty cafeteria at 3 in the morning, surrounded by the smell of recycled air and industrial cleaning products. "Probably," Dennis admitted, "but it's good stupid, important stupid." Betty sighed and pulled out her datapad. "What do you need?" Together they began gathering materials: LED strips from decommissioned equipment, fabric from old maintenance uniforms. Dennis saved portions of his own meal rations, storing them in a hidden cooler. Betty fabricated components in the engineering workshop, claiming they were for routine repairs. The most important piece took Dennis 2 weeks to build. Using Betty's technical knowledge and his own stubborn determination, he assembled a music box from scavenged station parts. He programmed it to play a lullaby his mother used to sing, a simple melody about stars and safety and being loved. But as Christmas drew closer, Dennis noticed something troubling. His supervisor started asking questions about his time management. Security logs showed unusual patterns in his movement through the station. Someone was paying attention. That someone was Holt, Varashil's diplomatic handler. Holt belonged to a species called the Vrex, beings who valued efficiency above all else. They had gray skin that looked like polished stone and eyes that saw everything as data to be analyzed. Holt had noticed the princess seemed different lately. Less compliant, more distracted. During official functions, she smiled occasionally, which was not proper behavior for a diplomatic hostage. When questioned, Varashil claimed nothing had changed, but Holt knew better. Something was disrupting the established order. He began monitoring the surveillance systems more carefully. He noticed a human janitor spending excessive time near the royal quarters. He observed irregular supply requisitions from the maintenance department. He documented everything, building a case. Dennis knew the risks were growing. Betty warned him repeatedly that they would eventually get caught. But when he mentioned stopping, Varashil's expression stopped him cold. "You don't have to continue," she said, trying to sound casual and failing. "I understand if it's too dangerous." "Everyone deserves at least one Christmas," Dennis replied firmly. "Everyone deserves to know someone cares about them just because they exist, not because they're useful or important or powerful. You deserve that, Varashil." Varashil turned away, but not before Dennis saw the heat shimmer around her eyes that meant dragon tears. "Why do you do this? I am nothing to you, an alien, a hostage, someone you should never have spoken to in the first place." "That's exactly why," Dennis said. "Because nobody else will, because you're lonely and I know how that feels, because making one person smile matters just as much as any grand gesture or political achievement." He pulled out a small card he had made with hand-drawn coordinates. "Christmas Eve, midnight station time, Section 12, observation deck. Will you come?" Varashil took the card with trembling claws. "If we're discovered, you could lose your job, possibly face imprisonment." "Worth it. I could be recalled home in disgrace. face consequences I cannot speak of. Dennis smiled gently. Then we'd better not get caught. Varashil clutched the card to her chest. For the first time in her life, she made a choice based entirely on what she wanted, not what was expected. I'll be there. The observation deck in Section 12 smelled like dust and old metal when Dennis first opened it. He and Betty spent hours making it breathable, cleaning decades of neglect from the windows and floors. The view showed a slice of space where Earth hung like a blue marble in an ocean of stars. Betty proved invaluable. Her engineering skills transformed random materials into something magical. She wired LED strips to create strings of lights that could change colors. She welded scrap metal into a small tree frame, which Dennis covered with wire and painted silver. Together, they made ornaments from anything they could find: folded paper stars, painted washers, carved pieces of plastic that caught the light. "This is completely insane," Betty muttered while adjusting the tree's base. "We're violating at least 15 station regulations for a Christmas party with one guest." "Best reason I've heard for breaking rules," Dennis replied, hanging another ornament carefully. On December 23rd, Dennis made cookies using the communal food synthesizer in the human sector. The machine wasn't designed for baking, so he had to trick it by programming the ingredients separately and combining them manually. The results were lumpy and slightly odd-colored, but they smelled right. That was what mattered. He also synthesized hot chocolate, which took 3 attempts and nearly got him banned from the machine when it overheated. But eventually, he had a thermos full of the sweet brown liquid that had meant comfort during his childhood winters. Meanwhile, Varashil prepared in her own way. She had never snuck anywhere in her life. Royal dragons did not sneak. They commanded, they flew openly, they announced their presence. But she studied the hand-drawn map Dennis had provided, memorizing every turn and access panel. The maintenance tunnels were narrow for someone her size. She would need to fold her wings tight and move carefully to avoid triggering motion sensors. The risk terrified her. But the thought of missing this one night, this one chance to experience something given freely, terrified her more. While they prepared, Holt tightened his net. He had traced Dennis's supply requisitions, noted Betty's equipment fabrications, and discovered the activation of power systems in Section 12. He did not understand the purpose yet, but patterns indicated a meeting, an unauthorized gathering involving a diplomatic hostage. This could be his opportunity. Holt had served as a mid-level handler for 12 years, watching less qualified beings receive promotions while he remained overlooked. Catching a security breach involving royal aliens would finally prove his worth. He began setting up monitoring equipment near Section 12, preparing to document everything. On Christmas Eve morning, Dennis finished his regular shift exhausted but determined. He had moved everything to the observation deck piece by piece over the past week, using maintenance routes that barely appeared on official maps. The tree stood in the corner, lights ready to activate. The cookies sat in a sealed container. The music box waited in Dennis's pocket, wrapped in paper he had decorated with hand-drawn snowflakes. He returned to his quarters and tried to sleep, but nervousness kept him awake. What if Varashil changed her mind? What if she was caught leaving her quarters? What if his gift seemed foolish to someone raised in crystal palaces? Betty stopped by at noon with a guitar case. "My grandmother gave me this before I left Earth," she explained, opening it to reveal a worn acoustic guitar. "Figured we could use some live music." Dennis felt emotion well up in his throat. "Thank you, Betty, for all of this." She shrugged, but her eyes were warm. "That princess sounds lonely. Lonely people deserve better. Besides," she smiled, "I miss Christmas too. This feels like home." The hours crawled past like wounded animals. Dennis reviewed his mental checklist repeatedly. Lights, check. Food, check. Music, check. Gift, check. But the most important element couldn't be checked or prepared. He needed Varashil to actually come, to choose this moment of connection over safety. In her quarters, Varashil watched the chronometer with intensity that could melt steel. Her handlers had completed their evening inspection, documenting that she was secured and compliant. They would not return until morning. The night stretched before her like an open sky. She wore the only thing she owned that felt like hers, a small silver chain Dennis had given her 2 weeks ago. He'd claimed he found it in a storage locker, but Varashil suspected he had traded something valuable for it. The chain held the paper snowflake from their first meeting, carefully preserved. Midnight approached. Varashil's hearts beat in doubled rhythm, a sign of fear in her species. She could stay here, remain safe, continue her comfortable suffering, or she could step into the maintenance tunnel and risk everything for one night of genuine connection. Her claws trembled as she opened the access panel Dennis had marked on the map. The tunnel beyond was dark and cramped and completely unlike anything she had experienced, but she folded her wings tight and stepped inside. The journey took longer than expected. Twice she froze when she heard sounds nearby, pressing herself against the tunnel walls until silence returned. The route Dennis had planned used forgotten passages and service corridors, avoiding every camera and sensor. He had spent weeks learning her path to freedom. In Section 12, Dennis and Betty waited. The observation deck glowed softly with Christmas lights. The tree stood proud despite its humble materials. Everything was ready except the guest. "She'll come," Betty said, though she sounded uncertain. "She'll come," Dennis repeated, and he needed to believe it. The clock struck midnight. For one terrible moment, nothing happened. Then they heard it, the sound of claws clicking on metal, moving carefully but definitely approaching. The door slid open. Varashil stood there, breathing hard from exertion and fear. Her scales caught the Christmas lights and threw back colors like a prism. Her golden eyes were wide with wonder. "I came," she said simply. Dennis smiled so wide his face hurt. "Welcome to Christmas." Behind them in the shadows where monitoring equipment blinked silently, Holt watched everything. He had them now, all of them. This would make his career. But first, he would let them celebrate. The evidence would be more complete if he captured the entire gathering. So he watched and recorded as the janitor, the engineer, and the Dragon Princess began the strangest Christmas party the galaxy had ever seen. He did not realize he was about to witness something that would change his understanding of value and connection. He thought he was documenting a crime. He had no idea he was recording a revolution. Varashil could not stop staring at everything. The lights shifted through colors she had names for in her language, but had never seen used for pure beauty. The little tree made of metal and wire somehow felt more alive than the massive crystal sculptures in her family's throne room. The simple decorations hanging from strings spoke of care and time, things worth more than money. "This is Christmas?" she asked, her voice filled with something between awe and disbelief. "This is Christmas," Dennis confirmed. "Well, a small version, but the important parts are all here. Light in darkness, warmth in cold, people caring about each other." Betty activated the sound system she had rigged, and soft music filled the observation deck. Not blaring or overwhelming, just gentle melodies that wrapped around them like a blanket. She picked up her guitar and began playing along, her fingers remembering songs from Earth. Dennis guided Varashil to the food he had prepared. The cookies were imperfect, some burned at the edges and others too soft in the middle. The hot chocolate had cooled slightly during the wait, but Varashil treated each item like it was made of precious metals. "You created these?" she asked, holding a cookie carefully in her claws. "Yeah, used the food synthesizer, which was an adventure. They're probably not as good as real bakery cookies, but I tried." Varashil bit into one carefully. Her species could eat most organic matter, though they preferred meat. The cookie was sweet and strange and absolutely wonderful. "This tastes like kindness," she said, and didn't care if that made no sense. Dennis laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "That's the best review I've ever heard." Betty began playing a familiar tune, one Dennis recognized from childhood. "Silent Night," she said. "Traditional Christmas carol. Want to learn it?" They taught Varashil the words, phrase by phrase. Her voice was deep and resonant, carrying harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't produce. When she sang, the entire observation deck seemed to vibrate gently, as if the station itself was joining in. The effect was beautiful and strange and perfect. "Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright," Varashil sang, and meant every word with an intensity that made Dennis's eyes water. They sat together looking out at the stars. Earth hung in view, that blue and white marble that had produced creatures capable of such stubborn compassion. Varashil stared at it for a long time. "That small world created you," she said quietly. "Created beings who care about strangers for no logical reason, who build celebrations around hope instead of conquest, who give gifts with no expectation of return." She turned to Dennis. "My people have colonized 17 star systems. We have technology that can crack planets. We have enough military power to make entire species surrender without fighting. But we never created anything like Christmas." "Maybe that's why you need it," Betty suggested gently. "Power is useful, but connection is what makes life worth living." Dennis pulled the wrapped music box from his pocket. His hand shook slightly as he offered it to Varashil. "This is for you, your Christmas gift." Varashil stared at the small package like it might explode. "I do not understand. What do I give in return? What is the exchange rate? What do you want from me?" "Nothing," Dennis said firmly. "That's the whole point. Christmas gifts aren't trades. You don't give them to get something back. You give them because the person matters to you, because making them happy is enough." This concept clearly shattered something in Varashil's understanding of the universe. She carefully unwrapped the paper, preserving each piece as if it was valuable. Inside was a small box made of composite materials, with a winding key on one side. "What does it do?" she asked. "Wind the key and see." Varashil turned the key carefully. Then she opened the box. Music spilled out, a simple lullaby that spoke of safety and love and being cherished. The melody was human, but the feeling was universal. It said, without words, that someone cared whether you were happy or sad, safe or scared, alone or accompanied. Varashil listened to the entire song without moving. When it finished, she wound the key again immediately and listened once more. Then a third time. Tears evaporated from her eyes, creating small clouds of steam in the cool air. "My mother sang to me when I was newly hatched," Varashil whispered. "Before they told her, it made me weak. Before they took me away for royal training, I had forgotten what it felt like to be sung to." She looked at Dennis with those golden eyes full of emotions her people said she shouldn't have. "You gave me back something I thought was lost forever." "Everyone deserves to know they're cared for," Dennis said simply. They spent the next hour sharing stories. Dennis talked about Christmas mornings as a child, how his mother would make pancakes shaped like snowmen, and his father would read the same story every year about a generous saint. Betty shared memories of her grandmother teaching her guitar, how music had carried her through lonely times on distant stations. Varashil told them about crystal canyons on her home world where young dragons learned to fly, about thermal vents that sang in the wind, about a baby brother she had held once before duty separated them forever. She spoke about dreams she had never told anyone, about wishing she could choose her own path instead of walking the one laid out by centuries of tradition. "What would you choose," Betty asked, "if you could do anything?" Varashil thought for a long moment. "I would study other species, learn their cultures, build bridges instead of weapons, help my people understand that strength comes in many forms and compassion is not weakness." She looked around the observation deck. "I would create more nights like this, more moments where different beings connect despite everything that should keep them apart." "That's a beautiful dream," Dennis said. "It is impossible," Varashil replied sadly. "I am a diplomatic hostage. When my usefulness here ends, I will return home to a life of isolation and duty. Tonight is a gift I will treasure, but it cannot last. Dennis wanted to argue, to promise everything would be okay. But he knew better than to make promises he couldn't keep. Instead, he wound the music box one more time and let its song fill the silence. Outside in the corridor, Holt watched his monitors with growing confusion. He saw no conspiracy, no espionage, no illegal activities. Just three beings sharing food and music and conversation. The Dragon Princess looked happier than she had in 8 months of surveillance. The humans looked peaceful. Everyone seemed content. This wasn't what Holt expected. This wasn't what his reports were designed to document. He had wanted evidence of wrongdoing, of security breaches, of something significant. Instead, he was watching something his species had no word for: fellowship, connection, love. The alarm shattered the peace like glass breaking. Red lights flooded the observation deck, turning their Christmas sanctuary into something harsh and threatening. All three of them froze as the door burst open and station security poured in, weapons drawn. Behind them came Holt, his gray stone-like face arranged in what might have been satisfaction. Princess Varashal, step away from the humans immediately. You are in violation of diplomatic protocols and unauthorized gathering regulations. Varashal stood up to her full height, wings spreading instinctively. I violated nothing. I chose to be here. Diplomatic hostages do not have the authority to choose, Holt said coldly. He turned to Dennis and Betty. You two are under arrest for cultural contamination, unauthorized contact with a political detainee, and misuse of station resources. Dennis felt his heart sink. He had known this could happen, but hopping and knowing were different things. Betty grabbed his hand, squeezing once for courage. The security chief, a large being named Gorlin who resembled a walking boulder, stepped forward. His species valued practical thinking above all else. Explain what occurred here, he rumbled, looking around at the Christmas decorations with visible confusion. Holt gestured sharply at the evidence. Illegal gathering, cultural exposure, clear violation of isolation protocols designed to maintain diplomatic stability. I asked what occurred, Gorlin repeated, not what rules were broken. Dennis swallowed his fear and spoke up. We celebrated Christmas. It's a human holiday about connection and generosity. I invited Princess Varashal because she was lonely. We shared food and music. That's all. That's all. Holt's voice rose to something close to anger, an emotion his efficient species rarely displayed. You contaminated a diplomatic hostage with your cultural practices. You exposed her to unauthorized social bonding. You created expectations and emotional dependencies that could compromise her political neutrality. I made a friend, Dennis said simply. That's what humans do. We see someone hurting and we try to help. We see someone alone and we offer company. That's not contamination. That's basic decency. Betty stepped forward beside Dennis. Is kindness illegal now? Is caring about another person's happiness a crime? Because if it is, then your coalition has bigger problems than unauthorized Christmas parties. Several security officers shifted uncomfortably. Gorlin looked between the Christmas tree, the leftover cookies, and the three individuals who clearly cared about each other. His species valued logic, and nothing about this situation matched typical security threats. What did you hope to gain from this? Gorlin asked Dennis directly. Nothing. I wanted her to be happy, that's all. I wanted her to know someone cared whether she was lonely or not. The simplicity of it seemed to trouble Gorlin more than elaborate excuses would have. His people understood trade, negotiation, mutual benefit. Pure altruism confused them. Varashal moved between Dennis and the security team. If you arrest him, you arrest me as well. I claim full responsibility for this gathering. I demanded his presence. I insisted on learning about human culture. Any punishment falls on me. That's not true and you know it, Dennis protested. It is true now, Varishal said firmly. Then she did something unprecedented. She invoked formal royal authority, her voice dropping into ceremonial tones that made the air vibrate. I am Varishal, seventh of the Crystal Throne, daughter of Emperor Torvin the Eternal. I claim diplomatic right of witness. If this station punishes Dennis Webb for the crime of kindness, I will report that your coalition values efficiency over compassion. I will tell my father that you imprison beings for offering friendship. I will make this a matter of interstellar importance. The room went deadly silent. Even Holt looked shaken. A dragon princess turning a disciplinary matter into a diplomatic incident could have consequences that reached across multiple star systems. You would protect a janitor? Holt asked, disbelief clear in his voice. I would protect my friend, Varishal corrected. And if this coalition cannot understand the value of that, then perhaps my empire should reconsider our agreements. Gorlin raised one massive hand. Everyone stop. I need to contact Station Command. This situation requires judgment above my authority. He looked at Dennis with something that might have been respect. What you did was foolish, human, but I begin to understand why your species does foolish things. As Gorlin stepped away to communicate with his superiors, Dennis noticed something. Other members of the security team were looking at the Christmas decorations with curiosity rather than disapproval. One, a being with tentacles instead of arms, was examining the paper ornaments closely. You made these by hand? The tentacled officer asked quietly. Yeah, Dennis confirmed. Takes a while, but it feels more meaningful that way. We have a tradition on my world, the officer said softly. We weave shells into patterns to honor our ancestors. My family stopped when I left home because it took too much time, but this reminds me why we did it, not for efficiency, for connection. Word of the confrontation spread through the station's communication networks like fire through dry grass. Within an hour, the human population knew that one of their own was facing arrest for celebrating Christmas, and they responded in the most human way possible. They didn't riot, they didn't make demands, they simply started leaving decorations everywhere they worked. Paper snowflakes appeared on walls, hand-drawn stars showed up on locker doors, kitchen staff began making cookies during breaks, maintenance workers strung lights in their tool rooms. It was gentle rebellion, quiet but persistent. Hundreds of humans simultaneously declaring that they existed, that they cared, that they would not be invisible. Station authorities didn't know how to respond because no rules were being broken. People were just decorating their personal spaces. By the time Station Command assembled for an emergency meeting, human sections of Helix 7 looked like Christmas had exploded across them. And aliens who worked alongside humans began asking questions. What was this celebration? Why did it matter so much? Could others participate? In the observation deck, Dennis and Varishal waited together while security stood guard. She held the music box carefully, winding it every few minutes to hear the lullaby again. I'm sorry I got you into this, Dennis said quietly. Don't be, Varishal replied. For the first time in my life, I chose something for myself. Whatever happens next, I had tonight. I had Christmas. I had a friend. That's worth any consequence. Betty sat with her guitar, playing soft melodies that helped keep them calm. Outside, the station's authorities debated what to do about kindness. Inside, three beings who had found each other in the darkness waited to learn if connection was stronger than rules. The emergency council met in a conference room that could hold 200 beings. Representatives from 30 different species argued for 6 hours straight about a janitor, a princess, and a Christmas party. Some demanded immediate punishment. Others questioned what exactly had been done wrong. The debate revealed deeper divides about what the Galactic Coalition actually valued. Finally, at dawn station time, they reached a decision. Gorlin was sent to deliver it. He found Dennis, Betty, and Varashel still sitting together in the observation deck. Security had allowed them that small dignity. Station Command has decided, Gorlin announced. Dennis Webb, you will be reassigned to different duties away from the diplomatic sectors. You will receive an official reprimand on your record. Betty Ochoa, same conditions. Princess Varashel, you must return to your quarters. All future contact between you is forbidden. Dennis felt something inside him crumble. He had expected this, but it still hurt. Beside him, Varashel made a sound like breaking stone. However, Gorlin continued, and something in his tone made them look up. There is a complication. The Draconis Emperor has requested immediate communication. He wishes to speak with Dennis Webb directly. The room's temperature seemed to drop. Everyone knew what this meant. The Emperor was one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. If he was angry about his daughter's treatment, entire diplomatic agreements could collapse. Within minutes, Dennis stood before a holographic projection 3 times his size. Emperor Torven the Eternal looked like his daughter but larger, older, with scales that were almost black and eyes like molten gold. Power radiated from him like heat from a star. "You are the janitor," the Emperor said. "Not a question, a statement." "Yes, sir, I mean, your majesty, Dennis swallowed hard. "Yes, I'm Dennis Webb. My daughter speaks highly of you. This is unusual. Varashel does not speak highly of anyone." The Emperor leaned forward. "Why did you risk your safety for her?" Dennis knew lying to an emperor was probably a bad idea. Because she was lonely, and that's not right. Nobody should be that alone. I know she's a princess and I'm just a janitor, but that doesn't change the fact that she needed a friend. "Just a janitor," the Emperor repeated thoughtfully. "My daughter said you told her that small acts of caring matter as much as grand gestures. Do you truly believe this?" "Yes. The biggest changes often start with one person choosing to care about another. That's what humans do best. We connect. We care. Sometimes it's stupid and inefficient and causes problems, but it's also what makes life worth living." The Emperor was silent for a long moment. Then he did something nobody expected. He laughed. The sound rumbled through the speakers like distant thunder, warm and genuine. "I sent my daughter away to make her stronger through isolation," the Emperor said. "I followed traditions that are thousands of years old, but watching her now, seeing her willing to sacrifice everything to protect you, I realized she was already strong. She simply had a different kind of strength than I understood." He turned his massive head to look at Varashel. "Daughter, you may stay on this station if you wish, not as a hostage but as a student. You will learn about other cultures. You will study how different species build connections, and Dennis Webb will be your guide." The room erupted in shocked voices. Station commanders protested. Diplomatic handlers objected. But the Emperor raised one clawed hand and silence fell. "My empire has conquered through strength for millennia," he said quietly. "But perhaps it is time we learned a different kind of power, the power of understanding, of connection, of caring about others as this human cares for my daughter." He looked directly at Dennis. "You are no longer a janitor. Station authorities will create a new position, cultural liaison. Your job is to help species understand each other through the simple human act of caring. Betty Ochoa will assist you." Before Dennis could respond, the Emperor continued. "And I am implementing something new in my empire. We will send young royalty to study with other cultures, not as hostages but as students. They will learn what my daughter learned, that strength comes in many forms and compassion is among the most powerful." The hologram faded, leaving stunned silence. Dennis looked at Varashel, who looked back with eyes full of hope and disbelief. "Did that really just happen?" Betty whispered. "I think so," Dennis replied, still processing. Station Command had no choice but to accept the Emperor's decision. Within days, Dennis found himself with an actual office, a real salary, and a job that involved teaching aliens about human concepts like friendship and celebration. Betty became his partner, using her engineering skills to help create spaces where different species could interact comfortably. But the real change happened slowly, in small ways. Other diplomatic hostages on Helix 7 heard Varashal's story and began requesting similar cultural exchanges. Species that had barely spoken to each other started asking questions, sharing traditions, finding common ground. The observation deck in Section 12 became official meeting space, renamed the Bridge Room. Dennis kept the Christmas decorations up year-round, adding contributions from dozens of worlds. The metal tree gained ornaments from cultures across the galaxy, each one representing a connection made, a friendship formed, a bridge built. 1 year after that first Christmas, Dennis stood in the bridge room surrounded by beings from 40 different species. They had come to celebrate together, not Christmas specifically, but the idea behind it. The concept that caring about each other mattered. That connection was worth the effort. That even the smallest gesture of kindness could change worlds. Varashal stood beside him, no longer isolated, surrounded by genuine friends. She wore the silver chain with the paper snowflake always, and she carried the music box everywhere, winding it whenever she needed to remember that she mattered. "You changed everything," she said to Dennis quietly. While around them, aliens tried hot chocolate and learned carols and asked questions about why humans cared so much. "No," Dennis corrected gently. "We changed everything. You chose to come to that party. You chose friendship over safety. You stood up for what mattered. That's what made the difference." "Then we both changed things," Varashal compromised. She wound the music box, letting its lullaby play. "Together." Betty joined them, guitar in hand, ready to lead everyone in singing, ready to teach 100 aliens about Silent Night. Dennis smiled, absolutely. As the celebration continued, Dennis thought about how strange life was. A year ago, he had been invisible, pushing a cleaning cart through empty hallways, feeling purposeless. Now he had friends from across the galaxy, a job that mattered, and the knowledge that one small act of kindness had rippled outward to touch thousands of lives. That was the real magic of Christmas, Dennis realized. Not the decorations or the gifts or the traditions. It was the choice to see someone else's loneliness and care enough to do something about it. It was the decision that connection mattered more than rules, that compassion was worth risk, that every being deserved to know they were valued. One paper snowflake, one music box, one lonely princess, and one caring janitor. That was all it took to start a revolution built on the simplest human truth. Everyone deserves at least one friend, and sometimes being that friend changes everything. The music played, the lights glowed, the cookies were shared, and in a small observation deck on a distant station, beings from across the galaxy learned what humans had always known. Caring costs nothing but means everything, and that is worth celebrating today and always.